Hi, everybody who's already tuned in. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple of moments. And while we're waiting for people to log in, you can see on the right side of your screen, there is a chat window. So if everyone wants to start off, just to make sure you know how it works, you can type in where you're dialing in from. Then if you want to share, we're curious to hear who has any good New Year's resolutions that they'd like to share in. So just get involved in the chat. We'll be monitoring that throughout and we'll get started shortly. And I'll throw it over to our panelists today. Do you have any New Year's resolutions that you're looking forward to working on?
I can go first. So it's not so much a resolution as I'm trying to be very dedicated to decluttering and getting rid of things before I bring new things into the house. So really looking at some of the things I have and saying, do I really need this? Do I really like it? Do I wear this? So that's going to be, hopefully I carry that through the year.
Solid.
That is quite similar to mine, Brenna. We're actually welcoming a baby next month. So organization and decluttering is at the top of my list for sure, as we bring a lot of new things in.
Excellent.
Oh yes, all the baby stuff.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I see we have people dialing in from all over the US, and I have to laugh. I saw someone from Tampa, Florida trying to stay warm. I'm in Colorado. We've had negative 30 for the past week, so I'll leave it at that. All right. Looks like we have people from all sorts of different states. Excellent. All right, we have quite a few people in, so let's get started today. So hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us with SparkHire and Checkr for a webinar about aligning diversity, equity, and inclusion with your hiring strategies in 2024. With this webinar, we hope to shed some light on how to assess your organization's readiness for DEI hiring and hope to provide you with some actionable takeaways to help you improve your process. So today's webinar we have scheduled for about an hour. It's more likely going to take about 30 to 45 minutes. Then we'll have some time for live Q&A at the end. So please leave any questions you do have in the chat throughout the presentation. I'll be monitoring that and marking the questions. We can go back to those at the end. And just so everyone knows, we also will be recording and sending out the recording of this in the email later on. So first, I'd like to introduce myself today. I'm Patrick O'Connell, and I'm Senior Product Marketing Specialist here at SparkHire. And I will be moderating today's discussion with our panelists. For those of you who are unfamiliar with SparkHire, we are a talent acquisition suite that's used by more than 6,000 organizations in over 100 countries. And our ATS, one-way interviews, and talent assessments have helped organizations streamline their hiring process while connecting more quickly with top quality talent. And our partner today, Checkr, they leverage automation and artificial intelligence to process over 30 million background checks annually. And this results in faster, more accurate, and more compliant results. With notable customers like Lyft, Instacart, Netflix, and Airbnb, Checkr's innovative approach to background checks has really driven its valuation to an impressive $5 billion while continuing to focus on the mission of fair chance hiring. And that's a premise that everyone, regardless of the background, has the right to be fairly assessed for a role that they're qualified for. So today we've collaborated with Checkr on this webinar to help provide some educational and actionable content that will help demystify DEI hiring techniques and help you build a well-rounded team. So I'd like to introduce today's panelists. From SparkHire, we have Brenna Walsh. She's Vice President of Marketing. And from Checkr, we have Ariel Khan. She's a Senior Strategic Partner Manager. So thank you to both of you for joining us today for the discussion. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be posing some questions for each of you to answer. And the audience will be able to share their thoughts and questions in the chat as well. I'd love to have you guys all chime in, share your thoughts, and let us know how you feel about the questions that are being asked too. So any questions you have, like I said, we'll circle back at the end for live Q&A. So let's get started with the first question. So as we know, today we are talking about DEI hiring. But what is that? I think it's really important that first we define what that phrase is a little bit and lean into what the importance is around DEI hiring. So let's go with Ariel first and then Brenna. Could you both please talk about why DEI recruiting is important in your own words?
Yeah, so I can start. And if it's okay, I'd like to kind of talk about it from a business perspective. So there are a ton of studies, and we'll kind of go into the details in a little bit, but a ton of studies that have proven companies with strong DE&I strategies and just with a more diverse workforce in general are more successful in bringing in higher revenue because they have those broader perspectives and the conversations they're having internally. So whether we're talking about points of DE&I that we're probably all a little bit more familiar with, so race, age, gender, or even more that, even sometimes I forget about, So like work experience, geographic location, that can really change someone's perspective when it comes to work. Uh, we need to focus on hiring colleagues who think differently and have different experiences than us if we want our companies to grow and adapt. I think also, in the past couple of years, as we all know, there's been a ton of talk around labor shortages. So if your business is able to get creative and find talent that either your competitors or just others in the market for those same types of employees are overlooking, that's going to be a huge competitive advantage for your group.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the point you make about it comes from all different parts of diversity, and we have the obvious things, but also being someone that has moved across country twice, you don't realize just how different people are in different parts of the world, and it makes all the difference. It's hard to see that sometimes we're just stuck in one place, so having those opportunities makes a huge difference. Brenna, what else can you add to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, incorporating a DEI strategy into your recruiting and hiring process is really important because, I think we all want to ensure that we're fostering an equitable process at every stage and that every potential candidate or potential employee has the ability to be successful. And I think, awareness is a critical part of that. And for many, it's the first step. Simply slowing down, being aware of the diversity of your company and the diversity of your candidate pool. And I also want to call out that diversity can mean so many different things to different people in different organizations. So considering which facets of diversity, from racial and ethnic diversity to gender diversity to neurodiversity, and I mean, there's so many more, deciding which of those areas are the focus for you. It's okay if it's not every aspect at once. You can't solve for everything at once. I think folks that are responsible for hiring and recruiting also should be mindful of how DEI impacts so many areas of the business, from candidate experience in the interview process all the way through to employee engagement and retention. And, since we know that the hiring process is a candidate's first interaction for the company, and the tone of that can really set the tone for future interactions with the organization, incorporating DEI into your hiring process is a great place to start.
Yeah, all excellent points. And I think you said something really important there, that because there are so many different types of ways to look at it, it can be overwhelming. So sometimes it is super helpful to just start small, take baby steps, take one step at a time. So thank you to both of you for really setting the stage for today's discussion. So I next want to look at our audience that are here today and the reasons they might be attending this webinar. So members of today's audience, you may be attending because you're interested in implementing or improving a DEI recruiting strategy at your organization. And what we kind of alluded to, one of the great places to start is reflection, both within yourself and by reflecting on your organization and seeing what your readiness level is for DEI hiring. So let's go to Brenna. How can our audience really start that self-reflection process when it comes to starting or improving their DEI hiring practices?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to not only reflect on why DEI is important to you and to your organization, but to honestly assess where your organization currently lies on the spectrum, whether you've got a DEI strategy in place or whether this is something new that you're working to implement in 2024. And, consider what you've heard or observed around the value of importance of DEI within your organization. Is becoming a more diverse, equitable, inclusive company part of an overarching strategy, or what is the intent in creating a DEI recruiting strategy in your org? Is it to create more opportunities? Is it to shift some numbers in your recruiting funnel? Consider who is aligned with your goals as well. Do you have leadership buy-in, or is that something that you'll need to build as you build your strategy? Will your hiring managers be open to the effort, or will you need to be really thoughtful and intentional about how you introduce these things to them?
Yeah, it certainly can be a tough conversation for some people, and figuring out the best way to talk with team members, with yourself, knowing how to say it, it's all got to be something very intentional. So thanks, Brenna. Ariel, what would you have to say about this one?
Yeah, I totally agree with Brenna. I think to start off with, whether you're building your strategy from the ground up or you're expanding and maybe improving a strategy that was already in place, everyone that's working on the strategy, should be diverse. So make sure you're looking into that as you're kind of building the team that's going to support you there. It's really valuable for your employees to understand that this is a priority of their company. So don't be afraid to pull in employees as well. I have found that they're really willing to help and even just give feedback to show what's important to them. So I would say be honest, be humble, and be really transparent in your reflections because it's very obvious when you're not. I was actually discussing our conversation today with my husband, and we were just kind of going through our experiences in the past, and even just between the two of us, drastically different. Myself as a woman in tech, and my husband is an immigrant from Bangladesh. So just, even feedback he was giving me were things that I would never have thought of. So just like a great example of why these conversations are so important. And just further kind of proves how diverse backgrounds affect those experiences and just your thought process in general. So I also think something that you need to think about is strategies, and strategies might be a loose term, but strategies you have in place that could be hindering your DE&I from the get-go, and it might be things you don't even realize. But just for some, examples, referral programs or a hiring process that really pushes a culture fit can unintentionally really push diverse candidates out the door before you even get started. So just making sure you're looking at everything you're already doing and how it can be affecting the pool of candidates that's coming in is a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. The ideas of culture fit versus culture add, those are very different. And I see a lot more people leaning more towards in the culture add. How can we build our culture as opposed to finding people who are just homogenous already in this, what we are expecting. So I'm curious about our audience. I'm going to put a question out in our poll. You're going to see a question up on your screen. We'd like to know who right now in our audience currently has DEI initiatives with their hiring process. So you can select yes, no, or not sure. It's always good to get a feel for what's out there right now and see if our audience today is looking to improve or actually implement. So it looks like it's pretty evenly split right now. A few more yeses. Okay. So that means we have some folks who might be learning about it for the first time and those who might be looking to improve it. So that's excellent. Lots of great perspectives, I'm sure, out there, because like Ariel just said, no one can be an island. It's not just one person's idea that's going to solve this. So having lots of different perspectives is super valuable. All right. Thanks to everyone for chiming in on that poll. I might have another one later on for you. Okay, now that we've talked about really how to assess your organization and yourself for readiness, let's talk more about some of those tangible strategies that organizations can use to really implement effective DEI hiring in their organization. So at the very top of the sourcing funnel, where organizations will be first appealing candidates for open roles, I'd like to hear from each of you. What are some of the methods and strategies that they can use to intentionally attract and appeal to a diverse talent pool? Ariel, you'd already started to go into that. So let's start with you first.
Yeah, absolutely. So here at Checkr, one of our, I think, most successful strategies is working with community-based organizations. Because like you had mentioned, really you're trying to get those diverse applicants into your funnel. So thankfully here, I'm actually in Denver, and we have a ton of community-based organizations. You'll hear them called CBOs as well. But we have a ton here that help companies connect with a more diverse applicant pool. So whether that's directly, some of them have events or even like job fairs. They might focus specifically on DE&I. They might focus on, for Checkr, we focus a ton on fair chance hiring, like we had mentioned earlier. So we work with a lot of CBOs on that. But again, either they're putting you directly in front of these applicants or giving you a ton of resources to get those applicants into your funnel. I would also say with your job postings themselves, I would work with your legal team or whoever kind of works on that to create a more personalized to your group and detailed discrimination disclaimer. I think we all kind of know the blurb that's typically at the bottom of job postings. But I think a lot of times potential great candidates look at a job posting and they just don't think they're qualified or they're nervous but your group maybe wouldn't hire them. So they don't even apply. And we don't even have the stats on that because it's really hard to measure. But I think being strategic about what you're putting in that disclaimer can really make someone feel actually included, which sounds kind of silly. But I know, again, just an example at Checkr, we talk about fair chance hiring in that disclaimer. And I think it really connects with the applicants and builds a rapport before they're even applying or speaking to someone at our company. And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. It's something that's easy to overlook. And I like the point you made too about reaching out to community-based organizations, because there are so many resources available that you may not know if you don't ever look. So absolutely looking for those people who are already experts in the field, who are already there and willing to help, is a great place to start. Brent, what else can you add about strategies for implementing in your DEI hiring?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're starting with sourcing, because I think sourcing is one of the most important things to consider. And it's one of the strategies that you can implement that has the easiest sort of barrier to entry. It's something, there's so many different ways you can do it, like Ariel spoke about. And I think additionally, into driving some relationships in the community with different organizations, you can also consider how and where you're sourcing for roles virtually, and how different pieces of HR technology can help with candidate attraction. I think the tools need to be user-friendly enough to get candidates into the funnel quickly. So, we're not looking to overcomplicate an application or over-engineer the experience, but we want those tools to, understand how to reach diverse candidates. I think there are a lot of, sourcing databases, DEI sourcing tools that, help forge relationships with different organizations, whether it's HBCUs or MSIs, other community or cultural organizations. And so, if you are looking to implement a sourcing strategy, you should think about it from a technology lens as well, because especially over the last few years, I think that technology has evolved to, bring some aspects of DEI to the forefront. We know that like our standard sourcing sites, LinkedIn and Indeed, but there are so many other ways to expand your recruiting reach, to bring more diverse candidates into your funnel, to kind of post your opportunities on places that diverse candidates may be more likely to check or maybe more likely to engage with. And I think after you've taken some steps to make your job postings available to more candidates, both in person and virtually, you also want to think about how the earliest steps of your hiring process, like screening and interviewing, support a variety of candidates, support a variety of experiences, support a variety of schedules, and those types of things.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And I know that anecdotally, we've heard from different parts of the world that sometimes there is an assumption of technological knowledge and availability, and that can be a hurdle for some people that you may not think about when you're posting your jobs. And so making sure you're doing something in a very accessible way that will appeal to people that may be in environments, locations, or technological availability that you may have overlooked. So all great places to start. And I see we have lots of questions coming in the chat. I appreciate that. Like I said, we'll get back to those in the live Q&A in just a little bit, but keep them coming. All right, so now that we've really gotten into more of the how-to part of this conversation, and both Brenna and Ariel have shared some strategies, let's talk next about how to get buy-in from other team members and decision makers at your organization, because that can be a huge hurdle sometimes. So what are some of the ways that our audience members today, they can bring these initiatives up internally? How are they going to get buy-in from the team? And if you have any other real-life examples of how you've been able to make this work that you can share today, love to share that out there so we can get some ideas flowing. Brenna, let's hear from you first.
Yeah, I think Ariel started to touch on this as well in one of her previous answers, but I think, you'll see the best results if your team is involved cross-functionally, if everybody is equally supportive of championing diversity. And, DEI should be a factor in lots of decisions that the company makes, not just hiring decisions. So really this involves, everybody from leadership to recruiters to hiring managers. And I think you're primed for success when everybody sees and agrees on the value of working alongside individuals with different experiences and perspectives, like Ariel mentioned. I think it's very nearly impossible to move the needle on DEI without being prepared to invest a little bit of money and some time. It's not a quick fix. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. And I think a well-planned strategy includes a trifecta of resources or strategies or considerations. I think one, being realistic, I think you need to dedicate some budget to train recruiters and hiring managers on unbiased hiring, especially if this is a new strategy for your organization. I think you need to consider your budget and or your strategy for candidate outreach, like we just spoke about, really expanding your recruiting reach, trying different sourcing strategies. And I think that you need to define within the organization some owners of these initiatives. Somebody needs to take ownership and shepherd the strategy through different cross-functional teams, engage team members to participate, to give feedback, and then also share results. I think everybody who is engaged in this effort really wants to see it working and really would be so motivated and energized when you start to make progress. And so people who own this initiative internally are the ones best poised to kind of keep that momentum going. And I think, if you have employee resource groups at your organization, getting involved with those is a really great place to start. In my experience, I have seen organizations gain the most traction when collaborating with engaged employees who are already engaged in, employee resource groups, engaged in the company culture, to work collaboratively to identify, prioritize initiatives like anti-bias training and establishing a presence in the community and forging some new relationships.
All excellent points. One thing I want to call out that I think is essential to notice that you said, if somebody decides we should do DEI hiring, we need to go now, just go from 0 to 100 right away. That's going to create some friction. So your first point of making sure there's training in place to get people to understand why it's important, how to execute it first before just hitting go, super important. So thank you for sharing. Ariel, what are some ways that you have found to really help build those champions within the internal organization?
Yeah, I think Brenna made a ton of great points, especially about it being a group effort. You can't do it halfway, right? Everyone has to be involved. I have found in the past having a champion internally, especially someone who has implemented a successful DE&I strategy in the past, is possible. I know it's not always possible, but that is huge in getting buy-in from those who need it. I think using data-based evidence to kind of start to get people on board and then work our way up, like you were mentioning. I think also getting stakeholders from specifically HR, recruiting, and legal, if possible, is going to be incredibly helpful because those people can really pinpoint the value that this strategy is going to bring to your company. And typically, especially, I have found on the leadership side of things, that's where the interest is, right? How is this going to affect our bottom line? How is this going to affect the company in general? So again, HR, recruiting, and legal are really the ones that can speak to that the best. I also think if you can get feedback from your current employees and really tell those personal stories, that is super helpful. I just think personal testaments from people they know, right? These are their colleagues too, are just so impactful. Just a quick anecdote, but at the beginning of my career, I worked for a nonprofit here in Denver at a high school, and our program really boasted, if you will, a diverse staff on all social media and website and all that good stuff. But in reality, it felt super performative to a lot of us who worked for them. So we kind of went the personal testament route and met with leadership to explain why we felt like, again, the social media and the mission were not reflections of our group, and why we needed to put processes in place to further diversify our company and really kind of walk the walk, if you will. So this provided a really good opportunity for the leadership to respond, to ask questions, to really fully understand where we were coming from. And I think that's why it was so successful, because those personal relationships were already in place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Seeing it, hearing about it is one thing, but truly engaging with it, having those experiences, engaging with people who are coming from different backgrounds, who have actually benefited from it personally, it makes a world of difference. It's much more powerful than just saying, I posted on LinkedIn about we have this initiative, but actually getting to experience it and taking that step to make sure you care to engage with people. That is, it's difficult, but it's super important. And there's no looking back once you do, because it becomes so apparent. But that being said, when it is so easy to talk about the intangible things, it can also be helpful to show those decision makers, the leaders, the people who are going to say, yes, let's do this. What is the business benefit when presenting this idea? So is there data out there that we can share with our audience today that really does demonstrate that DEI hiring is not just a humanitarian effort, which is important, but also is a positive business model for the growth of your company? Ariel, would you like to start on this one?
Yeah. So there are, thankfully, a ton of great resources these days. I'll kind of touch on my favorite, I don't know if that's the right word, favorite top two, but the ones that I reference the most. So the first is going to be the work of Dr. Catherine Phillips, and she was from Columbia University. So they created the Phillips Pathway for Inclusive Leadership in her memory. And she just had a ton of extensive research on diversity in the workplace. It was pretty cool because she would put together trial groups of a homogenous group of people and then a diverse group of people and have them problem solve different business related tasks. And pretty much every single time the diverse group outperformed the homogenous group. And the nice thing too is that, not only does she have, that statistic, but she would follow up with them as well to see how they felt like they performed. And it was really interesting because the homogenous group always felt like they outperformed the diverse group, and the diverse group didn't think as highly of themselves. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but so I just think, even though obviously that's a study, very controlled, it really does reflect conversations that we're having in the workplace. And I think it's just a really good opportunity to kind of show a different piece of what that could look like in the real world. And I'm happy to share these resources afterwards today as well. I also really like to follow the latest studies from McKinsey and Company. So they come out, I want to say every 2 to 3 years, with just an updated study on DE&I initiatives, how that's helpful for businesses. So I always kind of follow up with them, and consistently they're coming out to see a correlation between diverse leadership teams specifically and financial outperformance of those companies. So I would say those are my top two.
I think what's so interesting about what you just pointed out with those studies is the juxtaposition of the homogenous groups having a bit of hubris and having the thought that we know we're better, lack of humility, versus those groups that perform better, but may have been trained to think they were lesser in some capacity, didn't have a voice to feel confident. And it's really disheartening to hear that, but it's all the more reason why we need to help build people up so that we can have those groups that are going to perform more effectively with humility and still get those great results. Brenna, what other data have you seen that helps drive this as a business case?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some really great examples that Ariel shared. And I think, especially since 2020, the conversation around DEI in general has evolved, and the conversation around DEI in the workplace has evolved. And so, looking at the last now 4 years, there have been numerous surveys, studies, research reports hoping to capture how organizations are thinking about DEI and how a DEI focus drives positive business outcomes. SHRM is a really great resource that I always go to look for and find the latest studies and surveys related to HR and hiring and DEI. And really most recently, I think it was in November or December, they shared a piece by Accenture with, in partnership with some disability organizations on specifically disability inclusive hiring. And according to the study, companies that incorporated disability inclusive hiring practices, different accommodations, accessibility, screen readers, closed captions, all of those different things, experienced 1.6 times more revenue and 2.6 times more net income. So, some powerful statistics there. And I think, I appreciated the highlight on the disability inclusive hiring practices because I think that is one that, often gender diversity, racial or ethnic diversity is often the topic of studies. And I think it's important to also include all the different kinds of diversity in your thinking as well. And then, of course, there are a lot more, places to gather additional materials to share with stakeholders or colleagues, especially if you're trying to build alignment, build a business case. Forbes and Harvard Business Review also really consistently share amazing resources. And some of the most actionable insights that I've read around building a DEI strategy and, how this can really help the business in the long term is around evaluating your organizational maturity as it pertains to DEI. Imagining every organization exists on the spectrum from a very fully developed DEI strategy to, new and developing to none at all. And as you might imagine, the most mature organizations are the ones that see the best results in terms of competitive position, the degree of innovation within the organization, the external brand perception. And I think this is really powerful because when you consider that every organization has a different level of maturity, every organization likely started from lower maturity at some point. So it's really helpful in illustrating how possible organizational growth can be if you commit to it and have goals and, have unity behind the strategy within the organization.
That is an excellent segue, because next, the thing I want to ask you both was, when you're implementing a DEI hiring strategy, that's a great start. And you may be able to look at some of these examples that each of you just gave, saying, yes, we're able to have success in this area or that area. But you want to have a sustainable, measurable goal that you have in mind, so that when you put these efforts into place, you can say, yes, I achieved this goal that I set out to go for. So what kind of advice would you give our audience today when they're looking to set DEI hiring goals? And what are some of the main KPIs that you would look for or lean on when you're measuring success? Brenna, if you want to continue on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, goal setting is so important in being ultimately successful in the long term. And thinking back to some of what we were talking about a bit earlier about starting with assessing where your organization stands today, I think it's important to understand the results you're trying to achieve and what is realistic based on the place that you're starting from. And of course, each organization's goals will be unique based on where the company is currently. You don't want to sort of issue a blanket recommendation without understanding where you're starting from. And to track your progress, I recommend choosing, 3 to 5 key metrics or areas to focus on, and you can build up to more, layer in more as you start to gain momentum and see some results from your earliest activities. I think and the best way to do this and to leverage data is to benchmark where you are today and identify where you want to go. Starting by tracking incoming candidates and into your hiring process and conversion rates from stage to stage to pinpoint, where there are fractures in the process, where diverse candidates might be falling out of the process, and how you can address the process, intervene, and kind of better support everybody moving through your hiring funnel. I think looking at the major milestones in the process, you've got your job application submitted to your various interview stages, to your offer stages. You want to, benchmark where you are today and to set a goal. And I think a really good place to start is increasing the number of diverse job applicants that apply to your jobs by a certain percentage. Another KPI that's really important on the same sort of top of funnel thinking is tracking candidates by source. If you're investing your time, investing your resources to expanding your sourcing strategy, sourcing from some different channels, you want to have a good handle on your candidates by source to ensure your efforts are successful, and also to celebrate that success when it happens, to share that across the organization.
Yeah, I think like what we said at the top of the presentation, that you don't just have to go 0 to 100, go all inclusive, every possible outcome. Breaking it down by steps like that and having goals by individual hiring step is a great way to start. And I think you might have more to say about that, Ariel. I'll give you a chance.
Yeah, I think it's obviously really important to track DE&I not only in your hiring process, but really throughout the employee life cycle too. So like Brenna was mentioning, the top of the funnel, let's start there. Has there been a change in the applicant pool since implementing the changes within your organization? From there, you can really track other things like promotion of your employees that are diverse, and retention as well. There's a couple studies, and we can share these too, that show that diverse employees are more engaged. There is like a level of loyalty, if you will. So, those should be successful initiatives that you're seeing changes in the numbers. So kind of look there as well. I think, again, employee feedback here can be really helpful to understand, as your initiative has gone live, what is working and what isn't working. You all know employees will be candid with you. You'll get that good feedback, and you can kind of change or kind of look at your initiative from that feedback as well. Giving your employees the opportunity to share their engagement and satisfaction. Number one is going to build that rapport, but number two is really going to, again, help you really hone in on your initiatives. I think Brenna touched on this before too, but I think it's really helpful to implement resource groups within your organization, obviously depending on your size and the ability. Here at Checkr, we have a ton of resource groups, and I think employees find it really helpful. I think it's great to find that community, especially if you're a larger organization and the employees can feel a little lost, especially when they're newer. So really implementing those resource groups are helpful.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. When you're doing DEI hiring, it's not just checking a box, it's not just hitting a quota and then forgetting about it. It is empowering, it's enabling, it's collecting feedback, it's finding ways to continue growing and making everyone better. It's not just for, look at us on social media. It's very important to treat people with all the respect and empowerment they deserve. So thank you both for sharing those. Now we have one more question for our panelists today, but before we move on to that and some Q&A, I'd like to share one more poll question with our audience. Just curious to know if anyone would be interested in having a conversation with either of our presenting teams today, SparkHire or Checkr. So I'll put that up on the screen and you can answer whatever is the most appropriate for you. And we'll get you connected later on with someone from our team if you'd like to have a conversation. All right, so on to our last question. So much of our hiring today in the hiring world leans on technology and tools to make the hiring practices faster and more effective in more ways than one. So when it does come to DEI hiring, what are some of the tools that each of you have used? Some things that our audience might benefit from when it comes to their hiring tech stack within the realm of improving their DEI processes. So we'll start with Brenna and then round things out on the last answer with you, Ariel.
Awesome. So yeah, so having spent the last few years actually before I joined SparkHire, and an organization that offered DEI hiring tools to employers, Yellow for anybody that might be familiar, I've had a lot of exposure to the different offerings employers can leverage, both at the early stages of the funnel, the mid stages of the funnel, and then like Ariel was just talking about the, retention and driving success for your existing employees. And I think we spent some time earlier talking about sourcing, and I really believe that one of the most straightforward tools to use, tools to benefit from are DEI sourcing tools, effectively, helping employers expand their recruiting reach and making their job opportunities available to more candidates. And there are so many sourcing tools that are, available to source virtually. So when you're thinking about, not having a big team to travel or needing to do more with less, DEI sourcing tools that help you reach candidates online can really be an efficient, cost-effective, time-effective way to start. And then I think tools that make the hiring and the interviewing process more accessible to all different kinds of candidates are a step forward when you think about equity and providing the opportunity in your hiring process for all different types of people to be successful. And I think the asynchronous nature of video interviews like SparkHire provides candidates with greater flexibility, accessibility. Many candidates face multiple commitments, such as work, personal obligations, caregiving responsibilities, and being able to offer, flexible interviewing options allows more candidates to engage with your hiring process and feel confident that they're able to put their best foot forward, kind of making this interview fit within their lives, dedicating time rather than, feeling stressed by needing to squeeze an in-person or a phone interview into a limited period of time or a distracted period of time.
That flexibility piece is huge. I myself have worked in nonprofit before, working with the homeless population in Seattle, working towards getting employment. And that is one of the biggest hurdles, is fitting it into the world that people are living in, meeting them where they are, giving them the opportunity to be a candidate, to be someone who's viable in your organization. And not every existing process fits that mold. So some technology, like you said, flexible online interviews is certainly a way that people can work around that and help themselves get their foot in the door. So thanks for sharing. Ariel, let's round out with you for the last question here.
Yeah, like Brenna said, there's so many great technologies out there these days. My first suggestion would be, don't get frustrated if you're like Googling DE&I technology and you're not finding great answers. I think a lot of it can kind of help you target a specific either demographic or a specific aspect of DE&I that you feel like your company is not meeting. So maybe think about that. A couple different either groups you feel like you're missing out on, ways you feel like your technology is lacking. Kind of think about that. This is going to sound like a shameless plug, but Checkr, for example, like we mentioned earlier, we support fair chance hiring. So what that means is of the 80 million Americans who go to apply for a job and they have an arrest record or a criminal record of some sort, we really help companies look into that and decide, is this a candidate I should be turning away because of this record? Does this align with my values and our company in general? No, it doesn't. So let's move forward with this candidate. What is it? What sense does it make? So obviously that is a DE&I initiative, but it might not outwardly say DE&I. Another technology I have used in the past is a company called Trusaic, and they actually do technology that helps you assess the pay equity within your company. So again, not something that's specifically going to say DE&I, but something that is really going to improve, maybe not your funnel necessarily because it's employees and not candidates, but your overall DE&I strategy will greatly improve from having insights like the ones that those two companies can give you.
Yeah, excellent suggestion there, because like we alluded to before, when you implement DEI hiring, it's not just you're hired and then stop thinking about it forever. Pay inequity is a huge issue. It always has been historically. So making sure you have something set up in your DEI strategy to make sure that people are compensated fairly, or compensated equitably for their contributions to the organization. So excellent choices there to share. All right, we're going to move on to our Q&A session of today's webinar. I've already got a few questions marked from the chat, but please keep them coming in. There are no questions that are out of bounds here. We know this can be a touchy topic for a lot of people. So if you have things you're uncomfortable, just want to ask, feel free to type them in. We'll help answer them best we can. So let's start off with the first one that came in today. Christina asked, when you have a great posting or sourcing message that pulls in the right kind of candidates, and you have a lot of people applying just based on your company's DEI, how can we get hiring managers to broaden their assumptions to meet with a candidate versus looking at them on paper?
Yeah, I can take that one if that's okay with you, Brenna.
Absolutely.
I think Brenna made a couple great points earlier just on when you're going into your strategy and planning to make sure there is budget and or time for DE&I specific training for your managers. So I think that is point number one. I think point number two is to really look at your hiring process and see if it's really open to, your managers struggling because of maybe who someone is. So for example, changing your interviews to more skills-based interviews, if that's an industry that you're in and that makes a little bit more sense, definitely start there. And then again, like we've touched on, using tools that would kind of help the candidates have more access to these interviews and to moving further down the pipeline, I think will also be a big help. Anything to add there, Brenna?
Yeah, I think you make a lot of great points. I think the only thing I would add is, as you're working with your hiring managers to post roles or determine, your ideal profile of candidate, I think really being intentional in outlining the core competencies that you're looking for. And like Ariel mentioned, your skills-based core competencies, like what are the qualifications that make somebody a good candidate? And then holding your hiring managers to that, saying, okay, well, when we outlined this role and we agreed on these core competencies, I'm seeing all of these candidates that meet these core competencies as far as I can see, but they don't seem to be progressing. Can we talk a little bit more about that? And I think, that kind of open communication is really what you need to foster to, change a little bit of behavior in the organization if you're finding that's what you need to do.
Yeah, strong communication. There's no substitute for that. You have to get past some stubbornness sometimes, but it's important to keep on breaking through that wall. So thank you both. All right, next question. Curious to know if there are strategies that differ for very senior level niche talent where only a handful of qualified folks may exist to begin with.
I think the strategies definitely will differ. Of course, when you're hiring more senior level talent, your broad job posting strategies don't work as well, because there are just more limited folks that will make up that talent pool. You're looking for very specific qualifications. And I think that could be a time and a place where the relationships and, getting involved with different organizations, whether those are community organizations, professional organizations, cultural organizations, building those relationships and opening up some communication to, share that you're hiring for a role, try to understand, what folks are out there with those qualifications. Because I agree, I think posting broadly will be less successful, or it will take more time to find the right candidates, and relationship building, I guess, is what I would suggest.
Yeah, you really stole the words out of my mouth, Brenna. I was going to say really to look into those community-based organizations, because I think especially, and I agree, I think it is going to take more time, which top level hiring typically does anyway. But I do think it will take more time, maybe a little bit more research to look into and be proactive to look into those organizations that could help support your company there.
Yeah, they're definitely out there. I've worked with one before, hiring an executive director for a nonprofit. We were specifically looking for someone who better represented our clientele or audience we were appealing to, and organizations outside did help, and they're readily available. That was in a big city, it was in Seattle. So it may differ from place to place, but I'm sure there are places who work remotely and consult.
Yeah, or national organizations and things like that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. This was in regards to one of your questions, Ariel. Juan was wondering if you could give any examples of resource groups that you have for employees to help better foster the community there.
Totally. Yeah. So I can just give some examples that we have at Checkr. They all have like pretty silly names, so I'll just explain them, but that kind of makes it a little bit more fun. But we have one for Checkers. We call ourselves Checkers. For Checkers, different abilities. So they'll put events on. Some of them are educational. Some of them are just fun. We have like an LGBTQ plus group. We have some fun ones, like since we're based in San Francisco and Colorado, some like alumni groups. So like University of Colorado, again, they can kind of get together and watch a basketball game. So there's a ton of different ones. I think we have like 35 plus. So I'm more than happy to share other ones, but that's kind of, high level what they look like.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like it's really just all about making connections with people, expanding your network, and just getting involved with more people outside of who you necessarily would by default. And we do some similar stuff here at Spark Hire. A lot of it's interest-based, and so you get to interact with people, learn about them, and hear what they like, what they don't like, what they're doing in their personal lives. And like you get a lot more perspective on people and just get to understand, hey, there's more out there than what I already know. And that's the whole point, is bringing in more people, expanding your views so that you can all succeed together. All right. We're also curious, can either of you name some effective sourcing sites and vendors that you would recommend for DEI hiring?
Yeah, I can touch on this one. So I mentioned the organization that I worked with before Spark Hire was Yellow, which in 2021 acquired a DEI sourcing platform called WayUp. So it's specific to early career hiring. So if you're focused on, a lot of early talent hiring, 0 to 5, 0 to 7 years of experience, Yellow/WayUp is a great tool. But there are other job boards as well that have candidates participate from a much wider variety of experience levels. Seek Out is another good one. And there are lots of job boards that are associated with HBCUs and MSIs, minority serving institutions. And those are ones I'd recommend as well.
All good stuff. Ariel, do you have any others?
Yeah, I would say I would look specific to your area, because I do think there's a ton of great ones that are typically specific either to a city or maybe to a state, just because a lot of state funding will go to CBOs like that. I was just looking for Checkr, the ones we use for fair chance hiring. But in Colorado specific, there's one called the Civic Network, Jobs for Future. Again, I do think they're pretty geographically focused, if you will. So definitely look into your area because they can kind of help you find even the government ones that fall under the government are just as helpful.
Yeah, I think that any that are provided any public funding from local governments, they are listed on government resource sites. So look to your municipalities, your regions. A lot of stuff is available there. All right, we have one more question in the chat for the time being. Can you share any specific KPIs that were created and used for DEI hiring?
So from a specific KPI perspective, I think like I mentioned when we were talking a little bit about goals, I think each organization will and should set their own goals based on their benchmarks. I can give some sort of broad stroke examples to illustrate what I mean. But I think looking at the top of your hiring funnel and sourcing more diverse candidates, organizations that I have seen personally do this very successfully have a really good sense of their top of funnel at the outset of their strategy. So let's say looking at their funnel and they're seeing, 50%, white Caucasian applicants and, did I say 50% white, 20% Asian, 20% Black, 10% Latinx. Having that sort of breakdown and then saying, okay, well, we want to increase the percentage of Black applicants by 10%. So we want to see that shift so that we're looking at 40% white applicants and 30% Black applicants or what have you. You can look at the same thing. I've seen organizations look at the same thing as it relates to gender and wanting to really drive towards gender parity, especially in roles that maybe have been more male leaning in the past, like roles in technology and things like that. So I really think it depends. And I think, I would hate to set the expectation that you should be striving for a certain metric one way or the other, because, what is successful to you in your organization is likely not what is successful to somebody else, especially from where they sit on that maturity kind of spectrum. But that sort of a look is what I've worked with organizations on in the past.
I've got a similar question. So if you want to add more, Ariel, it may pertain to this as well. This one's also about DEI KPIs, so many acronyms. So how can an employer ascertain suitable percentages or numerical goals? So the background is Tracy works in the tech DoD sector, and they have more specialized and less diverse environment than other industries in general. So within that framework, what measures can they use to implement and navigate the inherent constraints they have of that very specific skill and still enhance their DEI outcomes?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great question, Tracy. And it is tricky because it's kind of like Brenna was saying. I think sometimes you can look into resources and not to rest on laurels, if you will, but to kind of look into maybe averages of what diversity looks like among similar groups. If you're working within the DoD, where are they having the most success? And again, sometimes it does have to do with training, and sometimes there's not equitable DE&I in the training section. So then that's going to obviously come into play. But I think looking at averages and just kind of seeing, what is doable. Like we said, you can't go 0 to 100, and we know that. So what are kind of small changes you can make that are going to push the envelope forward and get those more diverse candidates within the pipeline? Brenna, I don't know if you have any other more specific feedback for that one. It's a great question.
Yeah, it is a really, really good question. I mean, I think even when you're thinking about specialized roles or a really specialized hiring process, you might have to get pretty in the weeds and really even breaking down, different departments or different kinds of roles, or really what may seem like very small details, and to see what's feasible. If you've got roles in engineering and you've got roles in maybe even multiple kinds of engineering, are there, more candidates available in a specific discipline versus another discipline? And so your goals per position or per discipline may be different. And I hope that's not confusing. I mean, it just might be an exercise of kind of getting into the weeds and looking at, what is feasible for positions based on truly how specialized they are, or how many candidates you believe are available.
I think something else we can add here too is we're talking about this mostly in the framework of hiring, but if you have the constraints of an industry like that where you may not have as many applicants, it may, if it's something you really care about as an organization, you can also look towards creating opportunities for future investment. That can look like creating seminars, boot camps, going to college campuses of people that may have a more diverse group and saying, we're going to start a program that will help foster future generations of people so that we can hire in the future, even if it's not today. And that requires some lift and requires investment for sure. But if it's something that your organization cares about, it's absolutely a way you can look. And again, you can look to the CBOs to partner with and say, we want to do this. How can you help us? I guarantee there's going to be someone out there who wants to help you make that happen.
Great point.
All right. One more question. We have, thinking of the hiring funnel, besides the top of the funnel, where do you see your softwares and solutions working to promote DEI?
So I think looking at the various conversion points in the funnel, and again, because it might be different per organization or per hiring process, but you've got your conversion points if you implemented assessments into your process, how many candidates are moving past your assessment stage, and how many candidates are moving through your hiring, or not your hiring, your interviewing process. I think you really want to look at all of those major conversion points and take a look at the demographics of your funnel and see if there are, greater than expected percentages of drop off. I think there have been some studies, and I apologize, I don't have the details top of mind, but there have been some studies specifically around assessments and around coding assessments, where candidates from underrepresented groups fail coding assessments, for example, at a higher rate than candidates not from underrepresented groups. And so that was a flag to organizations who had coding assessments, but who were also trying to increase the underrepresented groups of candidates moving through their hiring process, to look at that, to dig in, to ask why, and really to understand if it was a true indication of that candidate's professional skills, or if there was something within the assessment that was tripping that candidate up, and did that assessment need to be weighted as heavily as it was? So really, I think those major conversion points, I think the interviewing piece as well, just from, as you've got more and more folks engaging with candidates, making sure that those folks have the training to conduct an unbiased hiring process.
Yeah, and I think even past, the point of them becoming employees, like we mentioned before, there's so much opportunity with retention, engagement, promotion, to really use technology to help your employees in that sense, and just help your organization with a stronger strategy as well.
Excellent. Are there any other last minute questions? Otherwise, we'll get wrapped up. No, doesn't look like it. All right, with that, I want to say thank you very much to our audience today. You've been great, excellent questions. We really appreciate those. And thank you, Ariel, for joining in today from Checkr, and Brenna from SparkHire. Appreciate you both. Any last words before we part ways with the audience from either of you?
No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great questions. Please reach out if you have any more questions. Again, we'll send out the resources. Anything specific, Brenna and I are happy to chat about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so much. So we will get this recording processed and emailed out to all of you who registered today. We'll provide a link to the recording, as well as there's a request for the resources mentioned, so we'll get those included in the email as well. So until the next webinar, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.